I'm Richard Mason, and I've written The Lighted Rooms. The focus of the book really is that moment in a family when responsibility shifts from parents to children. The central character, Joan McAllistair, is 80, and she's in the early stages of dementia, and she can't live alone, she has to go into her home. Her oldest daughter, Eloise, feels terrible about this, but knows that the alternative of having her mum live at home with her would be much worse, so she's going to do it anyway. Eloise is 48, very successful, independent, runs a hedge fund, and I wanted to create two very different crises in the book that neither woman can share with each other. Eloise takes a big punt on a rare metal called osmium, which sucks her into the most cataclysmic crisis of her professional career, which she obviously can't share with her mother for fear of worrying her. Joan, on the other hand, is retreating into a technicolor private world where curious things are taking place, and she can't share that with Eloise. But the reader gets to see everything. You know, I wanted to confront this idea that old age has to be decrepit and sad and miserable and boring. I mean, I think old age is like that for some people, but I wanted to write a book that suggested that old age might be quite fun, that losing your mind might be quite exciting. And actually, I spent a lot of time in old age homes researching this, and I was in an old age home in South Africa, and I met this wonderful woman, and I told her the story of the book. And I said to her, it seems to me that maybe, you know, losing your mind can of course be terrifying, and very upsetting, but it also might be quite adventurous and amusing. She leant towards me and she said, "It is." My Afrikaans great-grandmother was interned by the British in a concentration camp during the Anglo-Boer War of 1899 to 1901, and I really wanted to explore her experience. I went to Bloemfontein, and that led me very much into the world of the 19th century that Joan imagines as an old lady in a nursing home in 2004. My first two books, I didn't really do very much research, and what happens then is that the energy is always flowing from you as the writer. You're making everything up. This book, I did lots of research. I went and met a lot of amazing old people in old age homes. I spent a lot of time with scientists who work with rare metals, with hedge fund brokers, and what's great about that is that real life inspires you, and then things happen in your own head and the fiction takes place. But it's much more exciting and less exhausting, I think, to see what real life is like. Well, I guess I come from a family with quite problematic mental genes, but also ones that can lead you to periods of quite intense creativity. And for me as a writer, it's been very important to learn how to keep my moods more stable and not to go between extremes of, you know, incredible creativity and then times when you just can't get out of bed for weeks on end, because it's very hard to write books if you can't get out of bed. I guess, although I didn't set out primarily to write a book about mood disorders, I'm interested in the fact that it's very hard to establish what reality is, because your reality is different from mine. And I wanted to write a book in which Joan and Eloise's realities are very different, but both have equal weight, because every individual's reality is important. As I said, a lot of time in nursing homes, and it's very hard for the professionals who deal with geriatric patients to really connect with them, because when you're at the end of your life, you don't really want to make another friend, you don't want to tell someone your secrets. The elderly are actually quite private, so it's very hard for the professionals who deal with them to work out what's really happening in an old person's head. And so the temptation, I think, is just to give them quite textbook responses. And of course, a lot of people think that there's something wrong in seeing visions and having hallucinations, but if you're enjoying them, as Joan does, certainly in the beginning, I can see the desire to continue with them. I think the question, what is a good novel, is a question that all writers have to answer, and there's no one answer. In fact, every writer has to have their own answer to that question. And I think it took me most of my 20s, and the writing of my first two books, to understand what I meant by that. And I feel much more certain that I've sort of answered it in my own head. I think that what makes good fiction really compelling is having a fully and deeply imagined world, which is harder to do than it sounds, but you need to know everything about your characters and about the people who made them who they were, and their family backgrounds, and the kind of long inherited streams of cause and effect that make us all who we are. And I feel that having got the answer to that question much clearer in my head now, as I begin each book, I'm able to do it in a more focused way than before. And also psychologically, I found a way of writing that is emotionally sustainable to me, that I definitely was not able to do with my second book. And I think I've rediscovered the joy I always had as a child in making books. I mean, I tend to be quite a personal slave driver. I work really hard. I'm quite focused. And the weird thing about fiction is that it's not like other jobs. It's not true that the harder you work, the better you do. Sometimes you fundamentally have to relax and not push yourself too hard, because good ideas come in curious ways and at strange moments. And I think having written 2 books and shown myself that I could do that, I was able with this book to relax quite profoundly, and only to work when the book wanted me to work on it. And I think that shows in the writing, that I wrote it with a lot of joy. The title was one of the hardest things to do with this book, and in America it's not called The Lighted Rooms, it's called Essential Elements. It came eventually, I mean, because so many things happen in the book, it's about so many things, hedge funds and rare metals and old wars and geriatric psychiatry. It was hard to find a title that sort of fitted everything. And then I was reading a book of poetry by Larkin, and I came across this wonderful line: perhaps being old is having lighted rooms inside your head and people in them acting. And I thought, that's exactly Joan's experience, so we'll call it The Lighted Rooms. Although I sound English, I actually am South African. In fact, I can also talk like this if I really have to prove that point. But my parents were very involved in anti-apartheid politics and brought me to the UK when I was 10 and they had to leave the country. I feel as a South African, I'm blessed because South Africa is a country teeming with stories, most of which have not been told. And although only a small part of this book is set there, the next book is going to be set entirely in Johannesburg in 1983, in the vanished world of my childhood. A white family from the point of view of their black nanny. She, of course, knows all their dramas minutely, and they have absolutely no idea of hers. And I thought that there's potential for something very poignant, but also maybe quite funny in that dynamic.